What's up guys, Mike here, and I just want to say right now, the video you are about to watch might be shocking for some fans. I say that because I know you are going to be surprised by a lot of these trades and their effect on NBA history, but I also say that because when you get to your specific team, please try your best not to get insanely angry because again, some of these trades are just nuts. But this is a very long video, so I think we should just start right away with the Atlanta Hawks. And now this never happens, but to start this whole thing off, we actually have possibly, and this is not an exaggeration, the worst trade in NBA history. It involves two future Hall of Famers being traded for a draft pick and also contains a mystery. As unfortunately for the Atlanta Hawks, the draft pick that they traded, the number 2 pick in the 1956 draft, was used to take Bill Russell, a man who was only a 5-time NBA MVP and 11-time NBA champion for the Boston Celtics. Yes, that is correct. All the way back in 1956, the Hawks had the best power forward in the NBA in Bob Pettit and had the chance to form an unstoppable big man duo with Pettit and Russell. Instead, they traded for then All-Star Ed Macauley, a local guy who they thought could attract more fans but would only play in 3 more seasons in his career, and Cliff Hagan, a respectable 6-time All-Star. Now normally, that would be a good haul for a draft pick, but remember, during Bill Russell's time, the NBA only had 9 teams for a majority of his career, and so one player could make a massive difference, as we saw with both Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. The Boston Celtics would build their 11 championship teams during this era around their star center in Bill Russell, making them forever one of the NBA's most historic franchises because of this fact. If the Atlanta Hawks had kept Bill Russell, it could have been the Hawks who were finally remembered for winning a lot of championships with the Bob Pettit and Bill Russell duo instead. That is absolutely crazy to think about when you consider the future Boston Celtic and Los Angeles Laker rivalry, but also, did you remember about the mystery? Well, unfortunately here, there was a fun story about how Red Auerbach, the Celtics president, general manager, and coach at the time, was able to convince the Hawks owner to not take Bill Russell in exchange for tickets to the Ice Capades, a show of traveling ice skaters. That story floated around for a while. However, in 2013, Bill Russell pretty much put an end to it when he just flat out said St. Louis was overwhelmingly racist. If I would have gotten drafted by St. Louis, I wouldn't have been in the NBA. So unfortunately, due to the horrible climate at the time, it certainly seems possible that the Hawks did make this trade because of that climate. Just a horrible thing all around and hard to transition here. But with the Boston Celtics, trading for Kyrie Irving and having him leave was definitely unfortunate, but if Gordon Hayward doesn't go down for the season in the first game of the year, Boston could have very much made the NBA Finals that season. I mean, they got to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals without Gordon Hayward. So instead, we're going to go with a pair of 2 young players that the Celtics just gave up on. With the number 3 pick in the 1997 draft, the Celtics drafted Chauncey Billups, a future 5-time All-Star and NBA Finals MVP. They then proceeded to trade him just 51 games into his rookie season for older role players in Kenny Anderson and Popeye Jones. That is the worst move of the Rick Pitino era, but the Celtics were not done there, as in 2002 they also drafted future 7-time All-Star Joe Johnson with the number 10 pick and then traded him just 48 games into his rookie season for role players as well. 2 just truly baffling moves that didn't even make sense at the time. Meanwhile though, you might be shocked to hear that after the 2013 season, when the Celtics traded Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett to the Brooklyn Nets, most people actually thought the Nets had just fleeced the Celtics. In this trade, Boston received Brooklyn's 2014, 2016, and 2018 first-round picks, as well as the right to swap first-round picks in 2017. The reason people thought this trade was bad for the Celtics was that they thought these picks were all going to be in the 20s, as it was believed that Brooklyn was going to have a contending team for years to come. It turns out, Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett were shocked by the culture in Brooklyn and felt veterans such as Darren Williams simply did not work hard enough. This led to the Brooklyn Nets self-imploding as their stars left and they no longer had draft picks to build around, which meant in 2016, despite going 21-61, the Nets would watch as the Boston Celtics got their number 3 pick and took All-Star Jaylen Brown. Then, in 2017, the Nets had the worst record in the NBA, won the number 1 pick, but because the Celtics had the right to swap picks with them, it was the Boston Celtics who received that number 1 pick and used it to trade down and take All-Star starter Jason Tatum. So while the Nets are obviously fine now with Kevin Durant as their star, the fact that they were winning around 20 games a season for 3 straight years while also losing their draft draft picks will always be a horrible memory for anyone involved with that team. Before we continue, guys, I do want to say, if you are loving this content, if you do want to see more, please subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. Trust me when I say these videos take a very long time to make, so if you could subscribe and turn on post notifications if you want to see more, that would be awesome. And I also want to know in the comments, guys, what 30-team video do you want to see next? Cannot wait to see those comments. And now back to the video. Changing things up here, we are now at Charlotte, and in the 1996 NBA draft, the Charlotte Hornets got their man with the 13th pick, securing basketball legend and icon Kobe Bryant. The only problem was, instead of keeping Kobe Bryant, who many saw as a potential star, the Hornets proceeded to trade him to the Lakers, where then he won 5 championships. Now, many of you might know this, but what you might not know is that apparently Charlotte actually almost never made this deal. It has been said that Charlotte was not fully sure that Kobe would fall all the way to the 13th pick where he was selected, and that they wouldn't have agreed to the trade if they knew that Kobe would fall to them. As general manager Mitch Kupchak has said, quote, "There was such excitement around the pick that Charlotte actually didn't want to go through with the deal. There was a time there, whether it was Vlade or just pressure on the franchise, where the deal was actually in jeopardy." Well, you know what they say, guys, sometimes go with your gut feeling. Don't trade Kobe Bryant. Yikes. Looking at my own favorite team here, the Chicago Bulls, I say yikes every time I look at the 2006 NBA draft, where Chicago had the number 2 pick, selected 7-time All-Star LaMarcus Aldridge, and then essentially traded him just for the number 4 pick, Tyrese Thomas. As the number 4 pick in the draft, Tyrese Thomas would play in just 3 full seasons with the Bulls before eventually finishing his career at the age of 28. Because of this fact, there is just essentially no excuse for this one. This is a simple bad trade that might have cost the Bulls a championship. If the Bulls were able to still land Derrick Rose as well in the NBA draft, Rose's 2011 MVP season, where the Bulls won 62 games and lost in the Eastern Conference Finals, would have lined up perfectly with LaMarcus Aldridge's first season as an All-NBA selection. And yes, I know LeBron and the Miami Heat probably would still have taken down Chicago, but man, the Bulls would have had a much better chance, and of course, going forward, they would have had another 7-time All-Star to build around. It hurts me personally, but as for the Cleveland Cavaliers, we have a very different scenario than the one we had in Charlotte, which is the Cavaliers had their star. In fact, they had 2 stars in Kyrie Irving and LeBron James before the 2018 season, when it became clear that Kyrie Irving wanted to leave the shadow of LeBron James. I understand that. He wanted to do his own thing, and that is fine as long as Cleveland, who had just won a championship in 2016, got at least somewhat of equal value for Kyrie Irving. Instead, they traded for a package that essentially contained Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, and a 2018 first-round pick. The main piece being Isaiah Thomas, who was fresh off of an almost 30-point per game season where he had essentially shocked the world. The problem was he had a hip injury, and not only did the Celtics know it, but everyone knew it. Everyone knew that Isaiah Thomas was hurt, but we just didn't know to what extent. And unfortunately, immediately when both teams took the court that season, it was clear that this was a nightmare trade for Cleveland, as Isaiah struggled so much that he was traded for Jordan Clarkson, Larry Nance Jr., and a first-round pick the very same season. Absolutely horrible value compared to what Kyrie Irving could have brought in. And if that wasn't enough, LeBron James himself has said this: "Everyone knows that when Kyrie got traded, it was the beginning of the end for everything. It's not a secret." Those are some very telling words, but I also have to mention that Cleveland did have an absolutely terrible trade back in the day when they traded a first-round pick in 1980 and watched as that pick became Lakers legend and Hall of Famer James Worthy in 1982. So those are 2 horrible trades, but honestly, when LeBron James says that trading Kyrie was the beginning of the end for his time in Cleveland, I think that is pretty impactful. As for the Dallas Mavericks, really, they have steered clear of any absolutely franchise-altering trades or decisions, so we will focus here on the 2015 season, where the Mavericks, in an attempt to give Dirk Nowitzki one last solid playoff run on a 50-win team, traded for Rajon Rondo in a deal that included Jay Crowder, Jameer Nelson, Brandon Wright, and a first-round pick. This trade was so bad because Rajon Rondo and Mavericks head coach Rick Carlisle basically openly hated each other, to the point where either Rondo gave up on the Mavericks or the Mavericks Mavericks gave up on him after game 2 of the first round of the playoffs against the Houston Rockets. It was at the time publicly stated that Rajon Rondo was out for the rest of the series with a back injury. However, Tim McMahon from ESPN reported that it was a mutual parting of ways. Let's just think about that for a second. The Mavericks traded for Rajon Rondo, who has been a key player on several playoff teams since, and somehow the fit was so bad that they chose rather to play without him than with him for the rest of the playoffs. Insane. Changing gears here over to the Denver Nuggets. We have another case of a team with two horrendous trades, as back in 2013, the Denver Nuggets selected Rudy Gobert with the number 27 pick in the draft. They then proceeded to trade Rudy Gobert for Eric Green and cash. Gobert has since turned into a 3-time All-Star, a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, and is not even one of the two horrendous trades that the Denver Nuggets made. Because somehow, 4 years later, the Denver Nuggets would trade their draft rights to Donovan Mitchell for Trey Lyles and Tyler London. A just plain horrible trade even at the time. London spent just 2 years with the team and has not played in the NBA since, while Trey Lyles, a man who was about to be a third-year player who had just averaged 6.2 points per game on 36% shooting, shockingly did not work out. The reason I mentioned Gobert earlier though is that both of these trades took place between the Denver Nuggets and the Utah Jazz, which means right now the Utah Jazz's core was built by the Denver Nuggets. They traded them both, Gobert and Mitchell. At this time, Donovan Mitchell is a 3-time All-Star. He is only 25 years old. He, as a rookie, went to battle with Russell Westbrook in the first round of the playoffs and won. He went to battle with the Denver Nuggets themselves in 2020 and dropped 57 points in game 1. And consider this. I would say the 2021 playoffs were wide open. If the Denver Nuggets did have Jamal Murray, who is an all-star caliber point guard in his own right when healthy, they very well could have and would have competed for a championship at a much higher level. They could have possibly won the championship if they had Donovan Mitchell. In the 2021 playoffs, in a second round loss to the Los Angeles Clippers, Donovan Mitchell averaged almost 35 points per game. The duo of both Donovan Mitchell and Nikola Jokic is scary. The Nuggets could have had that duo for 10 to 15 years. And at this point, I still want to remind people that they could have done this with still Jamal Murray on their team. They didn't have to choose between the two. Murray was drafted in 2016. Denver chose Tyler London and Trey Lyles over Donovan Mitchell, simple as that. It also has to be mentioned though, the other horrendous trade here. Back in 1981, the Nuggets would swap then future 1983 draft picks with the Portland Trailblazers in exchange for T.R. Dunn, a player whose career high for a season as a shooting guard was just 8.2 points per game. Because of this 1983 pick swap, Portland was able to take Clyde Drexler, another shooting guard, just one spot ahead of Denver. Drexler would prove to be a slightly better player, as he was a 10-time All-Star, Hall of Famer, and had a career high of 27.2 points per game for a season. However, I am a Bulls fan, and this trade did give us Michael Jordan's shrug game, so personally, I think the Donovan Mitchell trade was worse. With that said, looking at the Detroit Pistons, I will say that many Detroit Pistons fans themselves were not happy at all with the Allen Iverson trade. In that trade, Detroit chipped off the face of their franchise in Chauncey Billups for essentially Allen Iverson, and then watched as that blew up in their face. The Pistons would go from a 59-win team in 2008 to just a 39 team in 2009, the very season that the trade took place. So I certainly understand why Detroit Pistons fans feel this way, but just as a basketball fan in general recently, I feel like it has to be mentioned that Chris Middleton was seen as an afterthought piece by many in a 2013 trade between the Milwaukee Bucks and Detroit Pistons. At the time, this trade was actually decently big news, but the reason for that was it was centered around two point guards who were seen as young, promising, potential all-star talent. In this trade, the Pistons would give the Milwaukee Bucks both Brandon Knight, again the centerpiece of the deal, along with Chris Middleton. The Bucks traded away their centerpiece in the deal in Brandon Jennings, a man who was out of the NBA just a few short years later, while meanwhile the third player in this deal, the one nobody talked about, Chris Middleton, has since been named to 3 All-Star teams, was either the second or third best player on the Bucks championship winning team, and to this day is still a Milwaukee Buck. So again, Pistons fans, I get the Allen Iverson trade, but that Chris Middleton trade is still hurting today. Now looking at the Golden State Warriors, yes, Golden State traded away Wilt Chamberlain, but he literally threatened to quit basketball if they did not. That was actually something he did quite a bit actually. Listen to this Sports Illustrated article from 1965. Quote, Chamberlain has quit or threatened to quit 5 times. As a sophomore and as a junior at Kansas after his first year as a pro, when his team moved from Philadelphia to San Francisco, and last week when he was traded from San Francisco back to Philadelphia. The threat has nearly always been used by Wilt as an instrument to bargain for more money, and he has constantly gotten away with the bluff. If the NBA had called his hand when he said he was quitting for silly reasons after his first year, it might have turned Chamberlain into a full-time athlete instead of a part-time financier. Sounds like Wilt was a little bit of a prima donna for his era, so the real trade that ruined the Golden State Warriors for years was when they decided to trade 2 future Hall of Famers away in the same trade to the same team. That team would be the Boston Celtics. Yes, Larry Bird can thank Golden State for the big 3 he went to battle with, as in the 1980 NBA draft, the Warriors targeted Joe Barry Carroll as their big man for the future, but they needed the #1 pick to get him. The Celtics had that pick and were more than willing to make a deal. Boston would trade that #1 pick for pick number 3 and Robert Parrish. Joe Barry Carroll would make one All-Star team, but he never was the player Golden State thought he was going to become. Meanwhile, Boston's selection with that #3 pick, Kevin McHale, and the man they got in that trade, Robert Parrish, not only combined for 16 All-Star teams, but again, they were 2 of the 3 main stars along with Larry Bird on the Celtics' 3 championship teams in the 80s. Without this trade, who knows what happens to Larry Bird's career? Who knows what happens to the Lakers-Celtics rivalry? Luckily, we do not have to worry about that because Red Auerbach is a basketball genius. There's a reason he is an absolute basketball legend. Going to the Houston Rockets, out of everyone so far, they have the most straightforward bad trade, I'd say. As back in 1972, future Hall of Famer Elvin Hayes was fresh off of 4 straight All-Star appearances to start his career at the age of 26 when he was traded to the Baltimore Bullets in exchange for Jack Martin. Jack Marin would make 1 All-Star team in Houston before leaving the team the very next season, while Elvin Hayes would become a star. He went on to make 8 more All-Star teams for a total of 12. He was named both a top 50 and top 70 player of all time by the NBA and led the 1978 Bullets in scoring and rebounding, which was impressive as they won the NBA championship that year. And would you look at that? Just another bad decision here, but it was a draft day move, so we'll cut some slack for the Indiana Pacers. Just kidding. As of right now, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard have teamed up with the Los Angeles Clippers. However, they could have played their entire careers together, as back in the 2011 NBA draft, the Pacers completely misread where the NBA was going and did not load up on wing talent, instead sending Kawhi Leonard, a prospect who many were concerned about because of his broken jump shot, to the Spurs for George Hill, a solid player who never made an All-Star game in his career. Meanwhile, Kawhi Leonard did develop a jump shot and then proceeded to become a 2-time Finals MVP, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, and a 3-time member of the first team All-NBA. Kawhi Leonard is a legitimate superstar who has led the Toronto Raptors to a championship as the main guy, and he could have paired with 7-time All-Star Paul George in Indiana. With that in mind, who knows? With both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, the Pacers might not have lost the Eastern Conference Finals in back-to-back years in 2013 and 2014 to the Miami Heat, especially considering that in 2014, the very same year, it was Kawhi's Spurs who took down the Heat in the NBA Finals, and Kawhi Leonard was named NBA Finals MVP. Yeah. Anyway, sometimes it's the right move to give up a draft pick in exchange for a star, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. But of course, because they are the Los Angeles Clippers, we have right here one of the worst examples of a draft pick trade gone wrong. As at the 2011 NBA trade deadline, the Clippers made a move to dump cap space, sending Baron Davis's large salary and a 2011 first-round pick to the Cavaliers in exchange for Jamario Moon and a first-round pick. The Clippers then watched as, despite the fact that they had just the 8th best odds in the 2011 draft, they hit the jackpot, they got the #1 pick, they secured Kyrie Irving, except that pick was now Cleveland's. And so with a young star in Kyrie Irving, it was the Cleveland Cavaliers who were now able to persuade LeBron James to come back and also team with Kevin Love to form a new big 3 that would eventually bring a championship to the city of Cleveland. If the Clippers just don't make a move to simply save money, they would have had Kyrie Irving and who knows what would have happened. happen. Luckily, actually, I will say very, very, very luckily for a lot of reasons, the Clippers are now under new ownership. It is very possible that the Russell Westbrook trade ends up at least on this list, but I do not want to pile on Russ. He has gotten enough this year. We also all know for the Los Angeles Lakers about the Kobe and Shaq trade, and yes, the Lakers did not get full value for Shaq on that one. I agree, it was a bad trade, but at least they got Lamar Odom, who was a key piece in the Lakers' 3 straight finals appearances with Kobe from 2008 to 2010. The Steve Nash trade did not give the Lakers anything in value in return. In fact, I would go as far as to say it set them back for years. As headed into the 2013 season, the Lakers had formed themselves a super team around Kobe Bryant, then first team All-NBA and Defensive Player of the Year caliber center Dwight Howard, and former 2-time MVP Steve Nash. The problem was Steve Nash not only had a problem with back injuries that was so serious that he could be found working on his back during games, but that also Steve Nash was 38 years old at the time of this deal. This meant that after Nash's back did give out on him in LA, the Lakers were now stuck with a large contract, which meant that the next season, when Kobe tore his Achilles, LA now had 2 big contracts on their book and just couldn't possibly compete. The Lakers would miss the playoffs for 6 straight seasons, which might not seem too over the top for some, but before this stretch, the longest the Lakers had ever gone without making the playoffs was just 2 seasons. Meanwhile, for any fans of the Lakers, yes, your team did just take a hit, but luckily for you, the Memphis Grizzlies' worst trade in their franchise history gave Kobe Bryant 2 more championships. Or at least the Memphis Grizzlies made things a lot easier when they sent Pau Gasol to the Lakers in exchange for basically nothing. Pau Gasol was not only an NBA All-Star at the time, but would become the Lakers' second best player next to Kobe, and a man who would average 19 points and 11 rebounds a game during both Lakers championship runs in 2009 and 2010. Without him, I'm sure the Lakers would have figured something out to get Kobe another star, but the fact that they did it without giving up Andrew Bynum, who was seen as one of the best young trade pieces in the NBA at the time, was not only incredible, it was so unbelievable that people called for the league to veto this trade. For Pau, Los Angeles traded away Kwame Brown, Javaris Crittenton, Aaron McKee, a 2008 first-round pick, and a 2010 first-round pick, and not a single one of those players or picks provided any value for Memphis at all. The only reason this is not considered one of the actual worst, if not the worst trades of all time, is that Memphis did get Pau Gasol's brother Marc Gasol back in this trade. Marc would go on to become an all-star, but was just the 47th pick in the draft the year before. He had not played in a single minute in the NBA. He, to be just quite frank here, looked like this. Luckily for Memphis, Marc Gasol did become an all-star, but again, the Grizzlies got so little for this trade at the time that other GMs wanted it vetoed. Meanwhile, the Miami Heat have actually been one of the best teams on this list in terms of not making a completely franchise-ruining decision. Yes, they have done stuff like trade away Shaq a bit too early, and they traded away Steve Smith, but let's focus here on this tweet from LeBron James. No way you take another point guard in the lottery before Napier. At the time, Shabazz Napier was seen as just a second-round talent, but with UConn, he looked absolutely incredible as he led his team to a national championship. Still though, he was seen as a second-round talent, but with this tweet in mind, and of course LeBron James' actual thoughts, the Miami Heat traded up for the sole intent of drafting Shabazz Napier with the 24th pick. And they got their man. They got Shabazz at number 24. LeBron was happy, tweeting out, "My favorite player in the draft, #Napier." The problem came when almost immediately, LeBron James left the Miami Heat to rejoin the Cleveland Cavaliers, which meant not only did the Heat trade up to get a point guard who LeBron James never played a minute with in Miami, but the Heat also passed up on 2 notable names in Clint Capella, who was taken 1 pick after, and Bogdan Bogdanovic 3 picks after. This meant Miami was left with Shabazz in an awkward situation as they didn't really want him fully unless LeBron James was involved. Shabazz would average just 5.1 points per game in his rookie season before Miami traded him for a second-round pick that was top 55 protected. I have never even heard of that kind of protection. You may have heard of the fact that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar not only played for the Milwaukee Bucks, but won his first championship there. He was also traded by the Bucks to the Lakers, where he then won 5 more championships and ended his career as one of the greatest players of all time. Kareem has both the same amount of rings and MVPs as Michael Jordan. Oh wait, he actually has 1 more MVP than Jordan. Yes, Kareem would retire with an NBA record 6 MVPs for his career, career, but the thing is, Kareem also wanted out of Milwaukee. He did do it in a very respectful way. He told ownership at a dinner so they could still get fair value for him. The problem is ownership then whiffed on the trade completely, but this was a demanded trade, just not publicized. What was not a demanded trade, and the real winner here, has to be the draft day trade for number 6 pick Robert Traylor. Traylor, for his career, never averaged more than 6 points per game for a season. Meanwhile, the man the Milwaukee Bucks traded for, the man the Bucks actually took with the number 9 pick, Dirk Nowitzki, went on to become not only a Hall of Famer, but also one of the greatest power forwards who has ever lived. Dirk is one of those rare people in this world who can say that he was the only real all-star on a championship team. That is how good Dirk was in 2011 when he and the Mavericks took down LeBron's Miami Heat in the NBA Finals. And to make things even worse here, not only did Milwaukee directly make a mistake by trading Dirk for Robert Traylor, but future 10-time All-Star, NBA Finals MVP, and Hall of Famer Paul Pierce was also available to be taken and was taken with the very next pick in this draft. Switching gears, the question for the Minnesota Timberwolves is, how much does a player demanding out really matter? We've seen with Ben Simmons that even with a demanded trade, if you wait long enough, you can still get very good value. The Minnesota Timberwolves did not wait long enough in the case of all-star Jimmy Butler, who, to be fair, had such a ridiculously bad relationship with the Wolves that this tweet from Woj became a meme, and understandably so. As it says, at one point in a scrimmage, sources said, Butler turned to GM Scott Layden and screamed, "You need me. You can't win without me." Butler left teammates and coaches largely speechless. He dominated the gym in every way. Jimmy's back. I will say the last part of that tweet is confusing, as Jimmy was not back, he would soon leave. However, I can't really blame Minnesota fully here for a bad trade. They still made a bad trade, sure, but this just does not sound like a good situation for anyone. And if anything, I would say the 76ers decision to not keep Jimmy and instead choose Tobias Harris was way worse, but I can blame the Minnesota Timberwolves for trading away Kevin Garnett. KG spent 12 seasons in Minnesota, 10 of which were all-star years, yet when he was traded to the Boston Celtics, the Timberwolves did not get back nearly enough. The full details of this trade really don't matter much, as it was centered around 2 guys, Kevin Garnett for Minnesota and Al Jefferson for Boston. Al was seen as an up-and-coming big and was a pretty good player for his career, but never made a single all-star team. Meanwhile, KG won Defensive Player of the Year the very next season, while also helping the Boston Celtics win the 2008 NBA championship. On to the New Orleans Pelicans. We're just gonna save this space for whatever the Zion trade is. Just kidding, Pels fans. I hope he stays forever. I really do. New Orleans has had a history of stars leaving, such as Anthony Davis, and notably here, Chris Paul. Trading away a star, as we've seen in this video, is never easy, but you at least need to get a real building block for Chris Paul, who was only 26, had already been named to 4 all-star teams, and finished second in the 2008 MVP voting race behind Kobe. So when New Orleans traded away Chris Paul after he asked out after the 2011 season, he was without a doubt seen as a generational point guard talent. With that in mind, you need to get a big piece back, and the main player that New Orleans got back was Eric Gordon, someone who was basically fool's gold. As while the 22-year-old Gordon did play at a very high level as a young player and averaged 22 points per game the season before the trade, he was also someone who had already shown serious injury concerns, and those concerns turned out to be very valid. Eric Gordon would leave New Orleans 5 years later at the age of 27, where he had then just averaged just 15.2 points per game, a noticeable drop-off, especially when he should have been in his prime. Meanwhile, Chris Paul has continued to dominate, has made an extra 8 all-star teams, was the point guard for the Lob City Clippers, was the point guard for the Phoenix Suns championship appearance last season. He has proven to be so great that New Orleans should have obviously waited here to make sure that the deal they did make was more of a guarantee and not for a player with injury concerns. Anyway, onto the team Zion will end up with. The New York Knicks have not had the best stretch lately, to say the least, as they have won just 1 playoff series in over 20 years now. A large part of that stretch is based on trades like the Eddie Curry deal. Nicknamed Baby Shaq, Curry would prove to have about as much in common with Shaq as me. Although for some reason, after his 4th year in Chicago that saw him refuse to take a DNA test to check out for a heart condition, the Knicks decided to go all in on a player who had never made an all-star team team, but also one who had a rapid decline. As in his 4th and 5th seasons as a Knick, Eddie Curry averaged a combined 3.1 points per game in just 10 games played. This may have been fine if the Knicks did not sell their entire future to get Eddie Curry. As in this trade, New York gave up their 2006 and 2007 first-round picks that became coincidentally 2 great big men. Longtime All-Star LaMarcus Aldridge, who we've already mentioned, and Joakim Noah. My man, one of my favorite Chicago Bulls ever, a player who at one point was first-team All-NBA and Defensive Player of the Year. I'm still pulling for your Knicks fans. Now on to the Oklahoma City Thunder. The James Harden trade is the obvious one here for OKC. So obvious that I'm sure you know all about it. Harden was a 6th man at the time, but formed a big 3 with Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant. However, because of a horrible decision to just not spend more money on James Harden's contract when extension talks began, or just a horrible decision to choose Serge Ibaka over James Harden, whatever the case, OKC sent Harden to Houston where he became an MVP. What if James Harden was never traded will go down as one of the biggest what ifs in NBA history. Without a doubt, OKC had 3 young players who were all going to become MVPs, all together on the same team and somehow never won a title. Looking at the Orlando Magic, I'm giving a lot of points to this trade for it just being plain stupid, because while the rest of the NBA was adjusting to the new perimeter 3-point shooting style of play, Orlando tried to do the complete opposite and attempted to pair Serge Ibaka, Aaron Gordon, and Nikola Vucevic together in one of the most misguided attempts we have recently seen. This trio was so horrible together that Serge was traded away for Terrence Ross and a 2017 first-round pick that was a miss the very following season. Meanwhile, to get Serge, Orlando gave up the draft rights to Domantas Sabonis, probably the best player in this entire deal as he is a big man himself who was already a 2-time All-Star at the age of 25, and they also gave up Victor Oladipo, who would emerge as a 2-time All-Star with the Indiana Pacers. Yeah, as we all know with the Philadelphia 76ers, they have recently made a huge trade, and so let's hope the Ben Simmons-James Harden trade is not mentioned on this list. With that said, we still have plenty to go on here, although we cannot count trading away Wilt because again, we do know that he was threatening to quit left and right. With that said, we can zero in on 2 trades. The first comes when the Sixers were just fed up with the antics of Charles Barkley and traded him away to the Phoenix Suns for Jeff Hornacek, Andrew Lang, and Tim Perry. Barkley was moved at the age of 28, but still had plenty left in the tank as the very next season, Chuck helped lead Phoenix to the NBA Finals after his first and only MVP season. It would take Philly 7 seasons to just make the playoffs again, so obviously this was not the right move. Neither was making the decision to trade for then consensus #1 pick Markelle Fultz. Coming out of college, Markelle seemed like a home run pick for Philly. They needed another scoring guard to pair with Ben Simmons, and Markelle averaged 23 points per game as a freshman in college. Match made in heaven, right? Well, turns out Markelle was suffering from a rare nerve condition that did not show up on any MRI or CAT scan. This condition was so bad that he basically lost the ability to shoot. As Markelle himself has said, I tried to work through it. I'm going in the gym, shooting thousands of shots, trying to shoot through it. And the whole time I just continued to make it worse. But again, the mindset that I had, I'm just trying to grind. I'm trying to continue to work through these issues and not knowing that I'm making it worse. So here, I don't blame Markelle at all. I do think Philly could have handled this better, as the impression left on people was that Markelle suddenly lost confidence in himself and was in his own head. Oh, and by the way, to get Markelle, Philly gave up the #3 pick, Jason Tatum, a current NBA All-Star starter who is just 23 years old and is so good that if Philly did team him up with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid early on, we might have already seen a Philadelphia 76ers championship run take place. Concerning the Phoenix Suns, we have another simple yet horrible trade. As in 2001, the Suns won 51 games, but after some serious off-the-court issues with Jason Kidd, I'm talking about wife-beating allegations serious, they understandably decided to make a trade. I, of course, have no problem with that. The problem I have is that Stephon Marbury was Phoenix's choice for that trade. Marbury already had his own slew of off-the-court problems, and this would really be magnified when he eventually played for the Knicks. As for the Suns with Marbury, they won just 36 games the very next season, and were only really saved by the free agent signing signing of Steve Nash. The Nets, meanwhile, would find their missing piece and franchise player in Jason Kidd, as they proceeded to reach the NBA Finals the very next 2 seasons with Kidd. Going to Portland, back in 1975 when the ABA folded, the former players in the ABA were drafted by teams in the NBA in a dispersal draft that led to the Portland Trailblazers seemingly locking in a dynasty. In an era where big men were kings, Portland now had MVP Bill Walton to pair with future 3-time MVP, Hall of Famer, and champion Moses Malone. Malone is considered one of the best rebounders of all time. He could have paired perfectly with Walton's high IQ passing style of play. Instead, Portland immediately traded him to Buffalo for a 1978 pick that produced a role player in Rick Roby. Then, somehow Buffalo also traded Moses immediately to Houston, where he became a star, but Portland takes the hit here. They made the move first, and of course Buffalo was going to make the wrong decision. That was just one of many bad decisions they made on the way to becoming the Los Angeles Clippers. Meanwhile, DeMarcus Cousins' time in Sacramento produced 0 playoff appearances, which was really no surprise, as the Kings have not made the playoffs since 2006. The thing is, if they had just kept the player they drafted the season after they took DeMarcus, it is actually very likely that that streak would have ended, as with the 60th last pick in the 2011 NBA draft, the Sacramento Kings absolutely nailed it. They took underlooked and underappreciated Isaiah Thomas and were immediately proved right. As a rookie, Isaiah won the starting point guard job, and then as a third-year player, he put up over 20 points per game. Isaiah's offensive talent was always there and on full display. However, somehow, Sacramento chose to ignore this talent as they overlooked Isaiah themselves. Deciding for some reason they needed a more traditional point guard, the Kings chose not to pay Isaiah and instead traded him for a player who has never played in the NBA, probably to avoid the Kings. Isaiah went on to rise up and become a 2-time All-Star in Boston, and in 2017 gave us one of the best seasons by a player under 6 foot tall ever. During that year, he put up 29 points per game while leading the Boston Celtics to the Eastern Conference Finals. The Kings remain the Kings. Looking at the complete opposite of a franchise though, the San Antonio Spurs have made a lot of amazing decisions throughout their history. However, nobody is perfect, and at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but I said it at the time and I'll say it now. The Spurs were just misguided in their attempts to replace Kawhi Leonard with DeMar DeRozan. I love DeMar. He has been awesome for the Bulls, but Kawhi, at least at the time, was simply better than DeMar by a noticeable margin. Kawhi was already a Finals MVP and had also finished second in the MVP voting in 2016 and third in 2017. DeMar was an All-Star, but with this decision, San Antonio basically decided to not commit one way or the other. They didn't rebuild, they didn't make their team better, they made it worse. And so after acquiring DeMar DeRozan, they only ended up with a first-round playoff series loss. That is it in terms of success. So while San Antonio this season does have young talent, of course, some of which they did get from moving DeMar later on, they of course missed out on acquiring an elite tier young piece when they traded Kawhi. They could have gotten a legitimate rising star. Speaking of stars, when one is unhappy, you should probably listen. That was the case with Vince Carter towards the end of his time with the Toronto Raptors. Vince decided after a 33-49 record in his 6th season that he wanted out. However, the Raptors not only did not listen to Vince's trade demand, but they also continued to let him play. Vince took this opportunity to destroy his trade value to the point where there were rumors that he was telling other teams the Raptors plays during games. If the Raptors had traded Vince before any of this, before he tanked his value, they could have of course gotten a great trade package for Vince Carter, but instead, after he tanked his value, Toronto was not able to get a single player that mattered back for Vince in a trade with the New Jersey Nets. Now, I think Vince was absurdly unprofessional here. I love Vince in general. I think as a veteran, he became an awesome guy, but just not trying and quitting on your team openly on the court is ridiculous. With the Raptors, Vince averaged 15.9 points per game in 20 games played on 41% shooting. Then that same exact season, after being traded to the Nets, Vince averaged 27.5 points per game on 46% shooting. Yes, his scoring went dramatically up, and so did his shooting percentage. So really, this trade was just horrible for both the Raptors organization and their fans. To the Utah Jazz. The Jazz did draft Dominique Wilkins with the 3rd pick and then traded him. However, we cannot count that. Dominique refused to go to Utah at a time where that was somehow still possible. He's even expressed regrets about that decision, so let's talk about the fact that the Jazz almost killed their franchise with another trade. Before the 1977 season, the Jazz traded away their 1979 first-round pick along with other players in order to get 33-year-old former All-Star Gail Goodrich. Emphasis on the word former. Goodrich would retire after the 1979 season, a season that might immediately jump out to you as the Jazz finished last in the NBA that year with a 26-56 record, which meant they were set up for a number 1 pick, except as we know, that pick was gone. It was owned by the Lakers, who used it to select someone by the name of Magic Johnson. Yes, if not for just a stupid, dumb trade by a new franchise, we never would have had the Showtime Lakers. We never would have had a lot, honestly. So while this one was horrible for Utah, it probably was good for the NBA in general. Going to our final team, we made it. We're at Washington, who really shows us that nothing is ever as simple as it seems. When Washington had the chance to get number 1 pick Chris Webber just a season after he was drafted number 1, they jumped at it, of course. Chris Webber at the time was seen as a generational talent. The fact that Washington was able to get him as a rookie was seemingly amazing. However, in order to get Webber, Washington gave up 3 first-round picks. The first was the number 11 pick in 1996, where Todd Fuller was selected. But if Washington was making that choice there, they could have taken either Kobe Bryant or Steve Nash. The 1998 pick Washington gave up became the number 5 pick, and we don't have to play what could have been there. That pick was Vince Carter. Washington also lost the number 7 pick in the 2000 draft, but so did a lot of people who actually made picks in that draft. It was just really a horrible draft. So in order to acquire Chris Webber, Washington really gave up 2 picks that could have been extremely valuable. If Chris Webber pans out though, that's still fine. What solidifies this as a horrible deal is that 1, Chris Webber's time in Washington produced just 1 first-round playoff exit, and 2, the trade that sent Chris Webber out of Washington to Sacramento was just straight up awful. Webber was still 25 when he was traded by Washington to Sacramento, and in Sacramento, he would emerge as a hero. He miraculously brought the Kings to a Western Conference Finals, while in exchange for Webber, Washington got a 33-year-old Mitch Richmond. They would not make the playoffs again until 2005. And so there we have it, guys. Thank you for watching. If you're still here, man, thank you for following along. Thank you for coming on this ride. Please comment down below that you are still here. If you are still here though and have not yet subscribed, please subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video like this, and so you just never miss a video in general. If you're already subscribed, thank you so much for supporting, guys. Thank you so much for watching through this. You are awesome. We all know it. And as always, have an awesome day, guys, and cue that music. If you're still here while the music is cued, here are 2 videos I think you are definitely going to enjoy. Make sure to click on one of them. Again, I know you're gonna love it. And other than that, have a great day and peace.